Welcome to the Homeschool Mom Chat. I'm Teresa Wiedrick. I'm the graduated homeschool mom turned certified life coach for homeschool moms, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm typically here 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every week on Instagram. And if you want to catch the replay, you can always find it on my YouTube channel, the Homeschool Mom Wellness and Mindset Coach channel. It's nice to see you. So this week I'm focusing on a discussion on motivation because, well, do I have to explain? I hear over and over that people are just tiring of their routines or the gray days. Actually, my day is kind of blue right now, but they're typically gray days and there is just a slump. It's a slump season that we're entering. And, over the years, I wrote at this time of year. And so I have documentation because I wrote a blog from pretty much the beginning of my homeschool years. And I discovered that almost every year I wrote about either winter blues, slump month, incorporating play into slump month, seasonal affective disorder, even scheduling a season of scheduled neglect, which I really like the phrasing of that. Actually scheduling in neglect. All of that to say, this is the season where we feel a little unmotivated, typically. And certainly, we're likely to see it in our kids. We might see that other times of the year too, but we certainly are likely to see that this season, even for ourselves. So I thought I'd share just a few of the times that I saw a lack of motivation in my home when I was homeschooling, in my family life. I remember very keenly that there was a phase, I misinterpreted it. And I think oftentimes that's a common experience of homeschool moms. We misinterpret what's going on and we assume that somebody's unmotivated because they're not engaging in an activity that we would like them to be interested in. And so we look and we say they're not motivated. Or when they get absorbed into certain screen activities or games, and then we assume they're not motivated, but they might be motivated. They might not be motivated the way we want them to be. I remember there was a moment before I was officially homeschooling, I was trying to help my oldest child learn to read because I'd heard that she was going into a grade 1 class where the teacher was tough. And so I wanted to help her prevent the experience that I'd heard other kids had. So I was trying to help her to read. We were in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, traveling, and we're sitting around a kitchen table in a little blue townhouse. The park was really sparse. There wasn't a lot of grass. It was, it has a lot of, lots of wildlife, or there were a lot of bison, because that's where we were. But there wasn't a lot going on, especially for kids. Not a beautiful playground, not a lot of people that I knew. We were new to the area. But I remember sitting her down, and she was probably around 5, and I had 3 other younger kids. I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to get her to read probably a Bob book. That was a common book that we used in our early homeschool days. But so Bob book or something similar. And I was just trying to get her to sound out the letters. I perceived at that time her resistance was not motivation. I don't see it that way anymore, but I certainly did experience it that way in that moment. And I pushed and wanted to continue pushing until she was learning or sounding things out. That wasn't helpful. I also saw, as kids grew older, that there was also a phase where they wanted to spend more time by themselves. And they didn't want to do everything with their younger siblings or as a homeschool group because they felt older and more mature. And so they wanted to feel set apart. And sometimes I perceived that as a lack of motivation. Certainly there were seasons where I felt a lack of motivation, and not coincidentally, it was February. It was typically around February. As I already referred to, the slump month. I didn't identify it in the beginning. I didn't know that that was a thing. I've introduced it to a few people, but I know there's a lot of people that are familiar with this concept that the slump month, is it being in the Northern Hemisphere in February? I'm curious if there's anyone from the Southern Hemisphere that experiences otherwise, if there's a different time of the year they experience that. But for us, I remember moving to this area and there was more gray days because we're in the mountains, so somewhere between November and February. And I remember one mom saying to me, well, the problem is you're not thinking like a bear. And since you're in the mountains and it's more overcast between November and February here, think like you're hibernating. That really helped me shift into accepting that it is just what it is. The days are shorter. There's sometimes some days that are so cold that nobody wants to go outside. And it just feels like you're locked into your home with cabin fever and doing the same old, post-Christmas, post-holidays. There's just not as much excitement, not as much to anticipate. And so then you're just trying to make it through, get through the curriculum, get through your routines, and they get kind of boring. Like all curriculum gets boring at some point, I'll tell you that. I don't think any curriculum didn't get boring at some point. Stuff gets boring because we just get tired of doing the same thing all the time. And also our routines get boring. We want to shake things up. So what can we do to shake things up? I'll speak more about Slump Month and this season in the next little bit, but specific to today, I'm giving you just a few different areas where sometimes people feel less motivated, or the conversations that I often have around motivation are the things that I've been sharing. But there is just one other one that I hear on repeat, which I'm sure is your experience too. It's kind of our cultural experience right now. It is that I'm worried about my child. They're not motivated. All they want to do is screen time. Yeah. And that's a common conversation point. So I go into a lot greater depth on all of these things on the podcast this week, the Homeschool Mama Self-Care podcast. And if you want to head over to Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, I'm there, Homeschool Mama Self-Care, or you can find me on my website at capturingthecharmedlife.com. So I'm curious where you would say you notice a decrease in motivation, or where you notice that there's a challenge to address just the verve and the energy in life. I think that we can encourage natural learning by doing a few things. For instance, we can create a space. We can create maybe reading nooks or creation stations around our home. I remember that we did actually do this typically at this time of year, where we would create different activities in different parts of the house. And we typically did that on the 100th day party. Do you have a 100-day party? I would have the kids cross off each day that we did formal learning activities. And when we got to the 100th day, we'd have a party, and we would create different stations of activities in various places around the house. That was pretty fun. We would do more of the intentional project-based fun stuff during this season to take away the boredom, to decrease the boredom or the routine of this season. When we allot or enable our kids, especially as they're getting older into adolescence, to have a space that's just for them, where they know they can take their basket of homeschool activities or resources and they can do their own work independently in a quiet place, their own space, it makes them a lot happier. It certainly helps them to connect better with their siblings when they get time away. I know that one of my kiddos had a tree house outdoors, and he would use that, and there was always bedroom beds with cats and a cup of tea, or window seats. We have those in our home. What space naturally draws your kids into a place of quiet and project time? I know one mom who shares that she enables her kids to have a quiet project-based time when in the afternoon, after their quiet afternoon time. So she gets her own quiet in a separate space, and each of the kids can move into their project-based art room, and so they can pursue activities in the art room. I remember encouraging her to just take, enable one of the kids each day to go into that project-based room. Because if there were 2 or 3 kids in that room together, when she was looking for quiet, she wasn't going to get quiet. Can I hear an amen? Something will happen. Somehow they will need mom's help for something. So creating spaces in our day so that we can move into different projects or different, quiet afternoon reading. Sometimes that helps us just to time block our days so that we can look forward to something that's new and next. So I think sometimes we can borrow from the unschool folk about strewing. We can do some strategic strewing. If you haven't heard that concept, strewing, it really means leave stuff around so that the kids find it and they're curious about it and they're motivated to play with it or learn from it. Sometimes we can just see it as almost like breadcrumbs of curiosity. We just lay it out there, and it's possible that they take zero interest in something. Certainly when kids get a little bit older, they recognize, oh, mom's strewing again. Like they actually know what we're doing. But when they're younger, this will work. And so sometimes we can literally take the things that we've been strewing and put them away for maybe 2 months and have them out of sight, because when especially younger kids don't have things in sight, they are curious about it again. Even toys that they really loved, if they don't see it for a little while, if it's put away, they come back to it and they can enjoy it again. So strewing, leaving things around that they might be curious about, probably will benefit their curiosity, fuel their curiosity. Of course, I'm sure you already are doing this, but having a weekly library visit where we continue to recycle the books or the projects that we can take home from the library and return them the following week, it says, I will pay attention to your interests and we will make sure to pursue those interests every week. We'll take you to the library and you can explore, or we can take you to the library and we can answer the questions that you've had all week and get something new. That mere act of looking in the library for new things can sometimes spark curiosity. But I'll tell you just a little homeschool mom hint. If you want to avoid extreme fees at the library, make sure you've got a basket in the common room, your great room, your family room, wherever, that you have a basket where the kids know those are where the library books go. Otherwise, the library books accidentally go to various places of the house and you never see them again. This is not helpful, at least not for your pocketbook. So that's one thing you can do, is strategic strewing. And the other thing is to really reframe the concept of boredom. One of the most popular posts on my website is about boredom, the bounty of boredom. Even though I didn't see this right away, I too felt like a homeschool mom that was always like, they're bored. Oh dear, I need to provide them something more educating or more engaging. I need to make sure that they're constantly in motion. Actually, I would suggest that is a suggestion from our culture, that we're always to be productive, but that's not actually how we learn. When I am in the Coach's Corner today, in the Homeschool Mama Support Group on Facebook, I'm going to actually speak to you about how people really learn, the cycle of learning. It's a theory, not my theory, about how kids actually learn. And certainly there is a fallow time, or a time when we are just contemplating and reflecting on what we've learned. And that might look like boredom if you're watching someone reflect or contemplate. As I've written, boredom is really like the birthplace of creativity if you are allowing for it, if you are recognizing that it is actually a useful place for your kids to experience at times. So I want to reinforce that it's useful to time block nothing. Like have time in your week or in your day where you say, I don't know what we're going to do, but we are not going to do anything. I've noticed that those are the times when, for instance, I wrote just 3 things down, and over my almost 2 decades of homeschooling, I've got a lot of examples. I remember writing a post about building a telescope, that my kids had built a telescope. Before it sounds too heady, I just want to say that it was one of those little science boxes that would send you a project every month. So it's like cardboard type telescope, not a telescope that you would say, oh yeah, I'll see that at the science center. But I remember them building telescopes and various activities that they really got in the mail. And they were more likely to do those things during the time where we scheduled no activities. They created games of all sorts. They created card games. They created board games based on sometimes their trivia, or one of my kiddos is very strategic and loves anything strategy. So then he created a variety of different strategy games. For somebody who didn't have a lot of interest in playing games when I was a kid, I sure have played a lot of games. But I watched my kids create all sorts of games. One of my kids, actually 2 of the kids, built a tree house. We made sure to get them extra lumber. That was things that we had already had around our homestead. And they just grabbed some big old nails and a hammer, and they went out back and they built a tree house. I remember finding some really old, dark, crepe-like curtains that were in a rental house that we were in for a while. And the kids took those and brought them to the back of the acreage and built a platform with curtains and created their own Shakespeare stage. You know, all these things were built from boredom, because I assumed that they were fine being bored at times. And I'll tell you, one of the tricks to boredom is actually restricting screen time. And that is very tricky to do when your kids have not had restrictions on screens before. That requires a different kind of relational boundary building with kids if they're very familiar with having screens whenever they want to. So I'll tell you that I saw them be bored because they didn't have screens all the time. I also found that because they were restricted in their screen time at times, they were very engaged when the screens came out, and that screen time became a beautiful time for me to have my time of quiet. And you can guarantee that when they got their screens, they were quiet. Well, unless, of course, there was one screen and then there were 3 kids fighting over it, but I digress. So I think we have to reframe boredom and really look at boredom and say, is it useful for my children? Is it useful for me? It isn't just our kids that need to restrict screen time. We need to set it aside at times and say, I don't need to do that right now. I want to create a morning of just reading or chatting with someone, or, planting some seeds or doing something interesting like that. If I do that, then I'm creating a downtime for myself. I feel a little bit more energized, alive, a little more present in my day rather than scattered on the screen back and forth from one app to the other app to responding to that person's comment. And it's not just our kids that get distracted and less motivated because they have a screen. It's us too. So I'm curious what amazing things that you've seen your kids actually do in their downtime. If you want to share, I'd love to hear. Hey, Nada, nice to see you. I think it's valuable for us also to look for natural signs of learning. When we pay attention to these things, we actually realize that they really are learning. And in fact, they're asking some really interesting things if we would slow down and actually pay attention. If you have access to a whiteboard or just a big piece of white paper and put it up on the fridge, anytime one of your kids asks a question or asks you to show them how to do something, or they want to know about something, write it down. You don't always have to answer it right in the moment. Obviously, you have other things going on too. So write down their questions. And then once a week, you can either answer it by, creating maybe on Fun Friday, there's 1 hour where you hang out with the kids and you simply are answering those questions. Or maybe you're answering those questions when you go to the library and getting resources designed to answer those questions. Or maybe you set aside an hour of YouTube time with the kids where you're like, okay, we're going to answer those questions. And then you discover amazing resources on YouTube. We did that. We repeatedly did that. I would say at least 2 times a week on YouTube, we'd answer people's questions. And boy, did I learn stuff, not just the kids. I also learned that there was value in writing the things or recording the things that they actually did, and recognizing that when they are doing things, they're learning things. They are not just, being bored. They're not just doing frivolous things. Everything that they do is meaningful. It's valuable. We might not always understand what the learning is attached to it. I think there would be a remarkably well-received book if someone would come up with this. This is probably not in my wheelhouse, but if somebody came up with the idea of translating the actual activities that kids do into educationese, it would bring so much peace to the homeschool mom's heart to know that kids are constantly learning, and even the things that we don't identify as learning, they are real learning. And it helps us to see that kids are constantly learning, whether or not it comes from a book. So write down the things that they actually did. You could do that once a day, or you could do it once a week. Easily we can screenshot, or we could take photos of the written type things that they do or the project type things that they do. There's so many easy ways to record things. And then at the end of the week, you could write their name and say a simple notebook that you'd find at the dollar store, write their name and then write what they actually did underneath there, and just spend a few minutes considering what is it that they're doing and what would that be considered as, like, a school subject. How would it compare to the learning in a school? Now I only want to reinforce that concept so that you feel more confident in what you're doing, not that you're comparing yourself to the school, but more that you can see that your kids really are learning no matter what they're doing. So I'm curious if there has been any surprise learning that you've noticed with your kids in the last few weeks. If you have any thoughts, you're welcome to throw it in the comment here. So when we're talking about motivation, I think it's useful to consider whether we are wanting to force it into being, or if we want to just facilitate an environment to allow it to be nurtured and to grow. On the podcast, I go into a deep dive of why we want our kids to be motivated anyway, like what's the value? I also ask a few journal prompts. What is the purpose of motivation? Or what are the worries that you have or the concerns you have around why they're not motivated? I'm curious if you have thoughts. What are the reasons you're concerned about when you see or believe that they're not motivated? Sometimes just looking at the why of what we're concerned about is the stuff that helps us unpack our, worried thoughts. Oh, Nada, you said some of the things my kids like: painting, subscription boxes, drawing, books. Yep, sounds like me too. That's the stuff that I did with my kids. That's absolutely the stuff that I like personally. I still like that kind of stuff. Maybe not the subscription boxes. I was never really that clever with those. But do you have a particular one that you use in Canada here? Or is it something that you're getting from another part of the world? I actually forget what the name is, the one that my son had. But those are really amazing boxes, because that's stuff that wouldn't come out of my mind. But my little engineering kiddo at the time, he just is very mechanically minded. He loved putting things together, still loves putting things together. In fact, whenever I buy something new, he puts it together. Very handy. Highly recommended to have an engineer-based child, an engineering mind. Now that he's 16, he helps me understand physics concepts, or at least introduces me to them. So here's a few thoughts. If you're trying to encourage motivation recognize that you can't force it. There's two kinds of motivation, they say. The intrinsic one, the one that comes from within, where you genuinely care about something. And then there's the extrinsic motivation. You know, like the carrot and the stick. The one that says, if you do these things, then you can go play outside. Or if you don't do these things, you won't have your screens. One of those, intrinsic motivation, is more likely to enable an environment of real interest and curiosity. And the other one will sometimes get the child to do the thing, but won't really foster an internal motivation. Now, as I said on the podcast, I think there are times, I'm aware that there are times that you're like, we just got to do the thing. And so it just has to happen. We confidently have to assert that something has to happen and we must do it. But it's useful for us to pepper those moments in instead of make the majority of our moments the extrinsic motivation. Okay, so I just, one other thought that I'm going to be over on the Facebook group, the Homeschool Mama Support Group, soon in the Coach's Corner, and I'm going to do a little more practical things around motivation that's designed just for you, not just your kids, because I believe that it's not just the kids that lose motivation in their lives. One thing I know to be true, though, is the more you lean in to child-inspired learning, deschooling, your unhelpful school to mindsets, you will feel more motivated. The more you accept the child in front of you, whoever they are, how they like to learn, how they like to engage in social moments, how they like to do things, or the things they like to learn, the more that you accept those things, the easier it will be to watch them learn. And then you'll realize that they're probably more motivated than you thought. And also, sometimes we just have seasons where we're not as motivated. And this is definitely the season. Can I hear an amen? I hope you have a beautiful week, and I hope you live a purposeful homeschool mom life. If you'd like to learn more about some of the coaching offerings that I have, you're welcome to book a no obligation conversation with me. If you haven't already resourced the Reimagine Your Homeschool mini course, just ask me for that, or you can just type Reimagine in the comments and you'll get access to that mini course. In a month, I will be offering the Reimagine Your Homeschool group coaching program, which is really just a jumping off of that mini course. And it'll be 8 weeks of less than 8 moms joining me virtually once a week. And we're going to tackle this conversation and a variety of other conversations about our big emotions and how we handle our big emotions of overwhelm and frustration. We'll be talking about how to bolster our relationships and build our boundaries in the most important relationships. We'll be talking about leaning into child-inspired learning and really acknowledging and honoring the real intrinsic motivation, and a whole bunch more. So if you're curious, just send me a message and I'll let you know more about the details. Have a beautiful week.